are in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone, and welcome to our June WEBtips session. I'll be your host, Justin, and we're going to go ahead and get started with our June WEBtips. Just some quick introductions and logistics. We're going to have everyone on mute so that we can go through the presentation. If you do have any questions during the sessions, go ahead and type them in our chat window, and we'll go ahead and respond to those as you're typing them. So if you're new to WEBtips, this is just a fast-paced session that we provide on all of the, it's hosted by Clear Process Solutions, and it's provided to give you tips and tricks around the Winshuttle workflow and desktop products. On the even number of the months, such as this month, we're going to provide workflow and composer tips, and then on the odd months, we're going to provide desktop-based tips. This is free for all of our active solution care. If you're not familiar with solution care or have questions around it, feel free to contact us. You guys have spoke and you were wanted access to our PowerPoint decks and our solutions that we've been covering in WEBtips. So now you'll find on our solution care portal that we've provided a knowledge base article that has a recording of our WEBtips. So if you did miss a WEBtips session, you can actually go back and view those, as well as look at the material provided. Just a little bit about myself, Justin Barr, and I'm a partner and a solution architect here at Clear Process Solutions. I have a background in both SharePoint and Winshuttle for well over 10 years now, and have integrated with a lot of different systems, from claims processing to ERP systems such as SAP, Epicor, PeopleSoft, JD Edwards. And I just love this tool and love talking about it, and love talking about the different processes that we do for our clients. So LinkedIn connections and Twitter, follow me, and we can talk about other process improvements that you're doing within your organization. Our June WEBtips topics are going to cover PowerShell and how we incorporate PowerShell into our form and workflow design. A lot of people have requested from Clear Process Solutions some things that are integrating with other systems, or just unique situations in which they need some way of integrating some outside data source inside of the workflow tool that's just not out of the box. So we've provided several examples, or we've created several PowerShell scripts, and we figured this would be a great month to talk about how we've incorporated PowerShell and what its impact is on SharePoint. We're also going to cover product roadmap. So this will be the first month ever that we've actually discussed some of the new features and functions that are coming out in the new Winshuttle workflow 10.9 and Composer 11.0.2. So most of us are on 11.0.1 of Composer and 10.8 of workflow. So we're going to talk about some of the new product features and functions that are coming out, some things to be aware of. A lot of this stuff is developed from Winshuttle in a box, and we don't really know or hear about it. So we were actually given access to some of this information, so we decided this month to go ahead and share it with you. So within your organization, you can plan for things like the new upgrade and plan for whether you want to implement some of the new features and functionality within your organization. So let's go ahead and get started. So PowerShell, if you're not familiar with PowerShell, it's a Microsoft scripting language. It's extremely powerful. It's based on the .NET framework, and it has a lot of things that you can do from an admin perspective or a developer perspective that a lot of the other scripting languages don't provide you. PowerShell is by de facto the language of choice and scripting language for a lot of the administrators for SharePoint, for Windows, for managing things within your organization. So we with Winshuttle, they've always had a plugin that you've been able to call PowerShell, but people never really understood how to incorporate that into their solution and into their design. Clear Process Solutions, in the past, we've developed actually custom SharePoint solutions or custom code that we would actually create our own custom PowerShell or our own custom plugin, and we would deploy that to the SharePoint farm. The problem with creating your own custom plugins for Winshuttle is that it is intrusive to your SharePoint farm, meaning that it will cause a reset. So a lot of times when we made updates to our code, or we happen to provide some type of update to the client, they would have to do it after hours. And you don't want to bring down your production farm during the day. So why we've been leaning more towards PowerShell is for simplistic nature and the least intrusive to SharePoint. Now, it doesn't provide you some of the IntelliSense as powerful as maybe C# does, but it still provides you a lot of flexibility from a development perspective. And a lot of the server and SharePoint admins really like this, because when we turn over a PowerShell script, we're actually turning it over to be put on the server, and they can actually read the PowerShell script themselves. They don't need to be a developer or coder in most cases, because they're used to seeing PowerShell because they write PowerShell scripts themselves. So we've really started focusing in on PowerShell for a lot of the requirements around forms and workflow, integrating with other things and other systems such as Active Directory, Exchange for email, and even reading an Excel file. And today we'll go actually through a use case for reading data from Excel that someone attaches to your form. There's actually a new feature that is actually going to be introduced in 10.9 that has a capability of reading from Excel. But there's a lot of things in the 10.9, it's just reading data, but there's more things that you want to do and more validation. If there's some type of validation you want to perform before you import it into your form, that's where your use case for using PowerShell. So today we'll demo the Excel file, and we'll demo attaching the file and how we import that data into the form. We'll also review some of the other PowerShell scripts that we've created to create distribution lists, read from a SQL database, and then even update SharePoint permissions. It's something that we created that wasn't really called from a form or a workflow, but we just created a PowerShell script because one of our clients said, we need to update all of our permissions for this Winshuttle form. Can you create something for us? So we used a PowerShell script to do that. So we'll review some of those today, and then we'll talk about some of the setup and configuration that's required in order to make all of this PowerShell scripts work. So let's go ahead and jump out of here and jump into looking at what PowerShell, some examples of PowerShell scripts. So we'll go ahead and look at our first one here. It's the update distribution list, and this one was created merely to create a distribution list for Active Directory. So PowerShell, at the very top, explaining what PowerShell has as far as parameters. You're able to pass in parameters, and these parameters are things that we can use inside of our PowerShell scripting language. So we're passing in a name of a distribution list, and then some of the members that we wanted added to a distribution list. If you're not familiar with a distribution list simply is a email that I can send to info@clearprocesssolutions.com, and it contains many employees within the company that will get that email. This next line here, we're actually connecting to an Exchange environment, and with that connection to the Exchange environment, that's providing us the commandlets that we're going to need to create the distribution list. So it's very, very important to create this session and to get this right. Some of the other things in PowerShell, like a lot of other things, they provide some standard date formatting that you can actually get the year, and we use that year when we create our distribution list. We want to make sure we're putting the correct year on it. So the commands are actually pretty simple. If it's it's a simple if statement with a new distribution group. You name your distribution group, and this is where we're providing the parameter that was passed in. So we don't like to hard code anything in our distribution list. And these parameters come into play within your form and workflow when you're using the Execute PowerShell plugin. And those are arguments that are passed in that we then use to create these distribution lists, because we don't want to hard code anything. So we'll show you when we actually go through the demo, I'll show you how we use that parameter to create and import the data from Excel. But in this case, we're just importing and we're creating a new distribution list. PowerShell provides these commandlets that are very simplistic in nature. You pass in your information, and then your distribution list is created in Active Directory. So the use case around this was simply not having to call the help desk to create a distribution list. You could create a form on a workflow. You can say, I want this name of this distribution list. I want these people. They could go to the help desk. They can see what you're requesting. They can click approve, and then that's all they had to do. So the help desk didn't have to go into Active Directory. They didn't have to create all the people that you specified and do all this manual configuration just to get a distribution list. Now we take the burden off of IT. We streamline the process. We're reducing the time to create these distribution lists, and we're adding tons of value to our organization and letting help desk do other things, such as maybe fix your laptop that's broken, or things that you can't do. And we can automate a lot of help desk activities. So this is just one example of something that the help desk would do for you that you may not see in the background, and you may be waiting if you're starting up a new project and you need a distribution list, or you're creating a new marketing campaign and you want to add a bunch of people. So we're streamlining some of the processes, and the help desk loves this, so they don't have to do this manually keying. They just have to look at it and approve it. So that's our distribution list and how we created that. The next one we're going to look at is actually reading SQL data, and we're going to push that back into the form. So this particular script was created because there was data that lived into a SQL server, and there was massive amounts of data, and it was coming from all of these different sources. And then eventually a form would be kicked off, and this form would then require that data that was in the SQL, and there would be some manipulation that was done that would need to happen within the script. So in this particular case, we have a simple one-line parameter that says, this is the ID, this is our site that we're using, and this is our connection string to our SQL database. So these connection strings are standard connection strings. I know on past WEBtips, we've talked about a website called connectionstrings.com that provides you the connection strings to SQL, DB2, AS400, SAP, Excel, any data source that you want to pull data from. You can certainly use that connectionstrings.com as a first step to get your information. You can see that we're interacting with SharePoint here by calling the SharePoint object SP site. So from a coding perspective, these are just SharePoint objects that we're interacting with, and things that we use all the time when we're using C# as the programming language. But PowerShell, as I said, it's an extremely powerful language, because it can use the same things that you use from a coding perspective in the scripting language to do the same things that you do with coding. So we're able to go ahead and open up the SharePoint site. We're able to find the list that we specified. So the list name we called it was test PowerShell form. And we're able to query SharePoint and get the correct form that we want back. And then we're starting to modify the XML. So Winshuttle, on every form that Winshuttle has, they have this form XML, and it's just a column that's available in any list. When you publish a composer solution or a designer solution, you'll see a form XML. So that XML is all the data that's stored in your form. Whether you decide to promote the columns to SharePoint columns or not, your underlying form XML actually contains that data. So we'll go ahead and look at that when I do our demo here, and we'll see that form XML. And so just to let you know, with all these PowerShell scripts, we're getting that form XML, and then we're going out to some other system, we're loading that data, and then we're putting the data back in the form XML as if you went into the form and manually did it yourself. So this is saving you time for not having to go look up, and this is automating the process. So with this example, we're just going off to a SQL server. We're getting some process information through running standard SQL commands. We're loading that data into a document for XML editing. And one thing that we found, and you'll see that I updated in our other script here, is this namespace here. What we found was if you use designer and info path, that namespace actually doesn't change. It stays that namespace all the time. The reason that namespace is important is every time you reference a field that's in your form, you have to reference it with the my keyword. If you don't have the correct namespace there, then the XML code won't allow you to update it. So we discovered in Composer, I was actually pounding my head for many nights wondering why my PowerShell script wasn't working with Composer and it worked just fine with InfoPath. And come to find out, every time you publish your Composer solution, the timestamp at the end changes. So with understanding that and understanding what happened, I was able to, instead of trying to just hard code the namespace, I decided to take an action where I would go search the XML that was provided from SharePoint and find the namespace that was corresponding to the Composer solution. So you'll see another solution where I'm actually, instead of hard coding this namespace, I just go find it. And I'll show you that in our demo today as well when we're looking at our form XML. Otherwise, updating your form is pretty simplistic in nature. This should look very familiar to you. There's my fields, formatted value, and then we just go ahead and insert. In this case, we're inserting a double value, and we wanted it formatted in a specific instance. And like I said, in the new version, when we look at 10.9, you'll see one of the new features and function is to be able to import data from Excel. But what it's going to do is it's going to take it from Excel and put it in here. But if you want any type of manipulation or any type of validity checking, that's where you're going to need to have a PowerShell command. So in this case, we're just formatting it. We're putting zeros, and then we're putting commas in there where applicable, depending on the value of that's being passed in. So we go through here and we update a couple of our values and groups, and some of these are, this is just a single value at a higher level, but then this one right here is actually a repeating table. So repeating tables, and what we end up doing is we end up calling this clone method, and we clone the node, and then we simply go through and put in our values into our repeating table. Once we add the values, then you'll see that there's a call that we end up taking this new node and we put it back into our form XML. And that's actually what our demo is about today. So I'll go ahead and cover that repeating table and section, because that's mainly what people are doing when they're interacting with Excel. They want a bunch of rows of data that are in Excel and they want to put them in their form so that they can kick off child forms or that they can do some other type of manipulation. So we'll go ahead and go to our next PowerShell script. This PowerShell script is one that was requested that there was a SharePoint list that had a bunch of Winshuttle forms in it, and the permissions were all wrong. There was no inheritance wasn't broke. There was the wrong people viewing the wrong stuff. So we wanted to create a PowerShell script that could simply go against the SharePoint API and provide permissions, read permissions to SharePoint groups and some of the other information. So with this PowerShell script, you can see that we're looking at some of the similar sites. We're going to a SharePoint site. We're looking at a similar list, here, the capital expenditure request list. And then this is where we're starting to interact with some of the other SharePoint object models for looking at the user information, looking at SharePoint groups. So you can, as we look down through this actual PowerShell script, we're updating SharePoint to say, find a SharePoint group called owners, add that SharePoint group to the form, and then go ahead and call the update method. And once we call the update method, all the permissions that were just added go ahead and get put back there. Another thing that we've been doing a lot with our form and workflow development is adding an auditors group. And auditors, if you're any publicly held company or even private held companies, they have some type of auditors, whether it's internal or external. And those auditors need access to your form to provide auditing. So with that, the auditors will always say, can you go print this? Can you go do this? Can you find me this? Wouldn't it be nice to let them self-serve themselves? So if they say, hey, can you show me where Justin requested access to SAP? Instead of giving them and printing out a document, you can say, oh no, just go ahead and go to our portal. We have you in an auditors group, and you have complete access to every single form that's ever been filled out in our company. So if you had the forethought to do that, great, you already have it set up. If it was an afterthought, then you're going to have to write some script to go add auditors to that. So you don't want to go to SharePoint and click on every single form. If you have 2,000 forms filled out in your organization, you don't want to go in there and literally grant everyone permission to your form. So instead, if you write a quick PowerShell script such as this one, we can say go find that auditors group, go ahead and for that list item, go ahead and add that group, and then go ahead and call the update method. So that will grant permission to the auditors, and the for each loop here specifies that says for every single item that's in this list, do this. So in the case of an auditors group, you do want to give an auditor access to every single item that's in that list. So that's what a for each loop is, and it'll keep on looping through. If you have 5,000, 10,000 records and you want to do something with them, even if it's not around permissions, maybe it's around moving forms or workflows to a different site or things like that. There's a lot you can do with PowerShell, so it's just a matter of putting the right syntax together. And in this case, this is a great script to have that'll allow you to say break all the permissions and then add the permissions back. So we will be providing these PowerShell scripts to you as a general guidance. They are as is. I would highly recommend that you do your development of a PowerShell script in a development environment and in a development site, so that you're testing what you're seeing here. If you have questions, we can certainly help out. But just keep that in mind that these are something that we run in our virtual environments that we're testing, because we don't get it right all the time out of the gate, and it can cause some havoc on your SharePoint environment. So you want to make sure that you have the capability to delete the site, or just it's a development environment that you're not going to bring anything down. All right, so that covers our permissions and our 3 PowerShell scripts. We're going to review this PowerShell script for our WEBtips session today, and we'll actually get a demo of our session. So before we go into reviewing that script, we're going to talk about what we did to get this to run correctly, and we'll also talk about some of the Winshuttle configuration options, form XML, and then how we promote a field so that we can tie it all back together. So let's go ahead and open up our virtual environment here and go to another site. Okay. So first and foremost, you have to install the OpenXML SDK, and we provided that SDK. I've zipped it up and I've actually provided it. It will be provided part of our knowledge base article, so you can download this. It's a very simple install. I've already installed it on this machine, so you just open it up, click next, 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 and then you're able to read Excel files and Word documents using Microsoft's OpenXML SDK. So this is specifically because this PowerShell script to read an Excel file is using the new version of Microsoft Excel that's using the OpenXML standard. So if you're using anything that says XLSX, that means it's using the new OpenXML standard. For your Excel files that are just XSL, I believe 2003 and maybe 2007, those files aren't going to use this API. So this is just the standard that Microsoft uses. So you'll want to install that first. So that's first and foremost. The next thing that you're going to do is you're going to create your Composer solution. So we'll go through our Composer solution really quick and show you how we set up to call an Excel file and call our PowerShell script that we'll review with you. And then lastly, you need to configure your Winshuttle site through Winshuttle configuration options to not delete repeating elements, and we'll discuss that as well. So with our form, we'll just open up our form tab and see what we're doing here. So on our form tab, we have a requester column that's just simply going to store the name, and then a form ID column that will store the unique ID of this form. So we have two controls up top, the current user control and the form name control, both of which are populating these fields. Next, we have an attachment that we're going to be attaching an employee data file. So it's an Excel file that has a couple rows of employee data that we want to take that data and populate that into a repeating table down here. So we don't want the employees to have to manually go through and type out, if you're importing a marketing event and you got a bunch of leads, you don't want the employee to have to go type in all the leads, especially if you have those leads in an Excel file. The same goes around SAP and your master data. If you're modifying a bunch of materials and you don't want the employee to have to go enter every single material and what the updated description may be, then you can use an Excel file as your primary source and have them attach that. Once they've attached the Excel file, then what we're going to do is go through a workflow step that we actually call our PowerShell script. So let's go ahead and take a look at our workflow. So the workflow is very simplistic in nature. It goes from a start node to a Winshuttle plugin. And after it goes to the Winshuttle plugin, it asks the originator who uploaded the file to review the data. And in your workflow case, you probably have many more steps that go off of that. It could call child forms. So we've demonstrated in the past how to launch child forms. So one parent form can launch many child forms. And we've also, so there's many more things after the workflow, but in this simplistic case, we're just having the person review it. In the Winshuttle plugin over here, on the right side, we can see what the name of our plugin is. So we're calling a plugin called, or we're using the Winshuttle plugin called execute PowerShell command. And as we've talked about many times in our WEBtips session, there's over 53 custom plugins that Winshuttle's developed, and you can actually create your own custom plugin to use. In this case, with calling PowerShell, there's only a couple arguments that we need to set. We need to say we're going to pass in the form ID, and that is a promoted SharePoint column, and I'll show you that on our form. And then it asks you what command do you want to call. Well, we want to call a file that's C scripts WEBtips read Excel file, and it's .ps1. PS1 is the extension for a PowerShell script. So we have this form ID here, and that is important in our PowerShell script to identify what form that we're interacting with, so that we can both get the Excel file that was attached, and we can put the data back into the form. So that's why we use these unique IDs. So looking at our form here, we have a form name and a form ID. If I click on the form ID column, I can see right here it says promote to SharePoint field, and the field is called form ID. So now if we jump back over to our PowerShell script that's located on the C drive under scripts, we have this WEBtips Excel PowerPoint. We'll go ahead and edit this. Now what's going to launch is actually the Windows PowerShell integrated development environment for PowerShell that allows you to provide some scripting, some IntelliSense, allows you to execute the command right from this window. So when I'm developing a PowerShell script, the last thing I want to do is fire up a bunch of forms and have to wait for the timer service to kick this off to execute. And I'll talk about the timer service here in a second. So the last thing I want to do is waste my time and wait every 5 minutes or every minute when I want to kick off the timer schedule, depending if you have access to the server or not. So if you have access to the server like I do, you can actually open up the task scheduler and you'll find there's a Winshuttle service that runs. And in our case, and most of the cases we set up for all of our clients, this thing runs every 5 minutes. So if you're impatient like me, you can just right-click on it and hit run, and then it'll go execute your PowerShell that you're waiting for in your workflow. But if you want to go ahead and speed up the process, you can just go ahead and develop your PowerShell script using this particular command. And then you can see at the very top we're expecting form ID. So form ID is the unique form that we're interacting with. And what we could do is we can uncomment form ID down here and hard code it to be whatever unique number we have in our SharePoint list. So in our case, I put form ID 003. If we go to SharePoint and we go to our Web Tips and Tricks session, we're going to see a list on the left side that says read Excel file with PowerShell. And then furthermore, we can see over on the far right, it says form_ID, and then we have a number 3 here. And we have 4 and 5. So we can really put any one that we'd like to test this out with. And what I'll do is I'll run it from the interface first, and then I'll launch it from the actual form and workflow and show you 2 different instances. So of course, like anybody that's doing development, you're a lot of trial and errors, and you can write outputs to the screen by simply saying write-output test. We can just say beginning. So that's going to write it out to the screen, and that helps you when you're debugging your PowerShell script to determine what's wrong. You know, of course, when I developed this, I had the wrong variable name and things weren't working. So I finally got everything worked out, and that's how I tested it. And I wasn't interacting with the form and workflow solution. I was just merely testing my script. And all you need is an item in your SharePoint list or library. So looking at our schemas down here, I had mentioned earlier that in the past I learned from my mistake that I was using the schema and I was hard coding it. Now what I'm doing is I'm reading the form XML from the SharePoint list, and then I'm looking for a specific index of XML NS my, and then I'm taking a substring of that and I'm plugging that into my actual schema variable. So that's important because that's how we're going to interact with our form and workflow. And this script is very straightforward. It's going to go ahead and say, go grab the attachment that's in the Excel file that was attached to our form. So if we remember our form, there was a file that you can attach to the Excel file. What a lot of people don't know with Winshuttle is when you add those attachments to your form, they're actually getting stored as an attachment on the form. So if I click on View Item, at the very bottom, we can see right here it says Attachments, and then we can see my employee file here. So that employee file, whenever you add an attachment control to your Composer solution, you're always going to have an employee file that's actually stored as far as SharePoint. So our script is going to go ahead and grab that employee file, and there's a specific syntax that you got to use for SharePoint to go get that file. The good thing for you guys is that I've already provided that syntax, and you'll get copies of the script, so you'll be able to go ahead and grab that file. After we grab the file, we start using the OpenOffice API, which is the format OpenOffice spreadsheet, that we're actually going to start reading data from that file. And what our first thing is it says loop through every sheet that's in this workbook, and we're going to see if there's a value called sheet 1. So if you have a specific sheet that you're going after, maybe there's an Excel file that you have 15 sheets, but only 2 of the sheets you need, or maybe you have 5 sheets for each one of the departments that interact with it, and the 6th sheet actually brings all that together that no one can see. You can use this to actually go against that sheet. So we're finding one that's called sheet 1. And then inside of sheet 1, we actually start to go down through and read the information from that sheet and pull out data such as the ID of the employee, and we're storing that in a field called ID on our form. We're pulling out first name, and we're storing that in the first name field. So we have first name here, and you can see it's referenced my:first_name. And then we're looking at last name. So if we go to our actual composer solution, we can see a one-to-one relationship on our form data tab that says ID, first name, last name. And these are all the fields that are located down here. We'll go ahead and also look at our Excel file that we've been playing with, or that we're attaching. So the Excel file is just a very simple file back here that has our ID, our first name, and our last name. So just very, very simple Excel file that has 3 columns. You could have 100 columns. This thing, PowerShell performs extremely quick, and we'll look through all this data relatively quickly. If we look at SharePoint again, the one thing I wanted to point out is if I click on this ID column or this first name column, I'm not promoting these as a SharePoint column. So it says you want to promote this as a SharePoint field, and we did that for form ID, but we didn't do it for this. Even though you don't promote these as SharePoint columns, it still gets stored in the form XML. So you can see form XML, and if we do a find on first name, you're going to actually see the first name field right here where it's my:first name. So with our PowerShell script, we're looking at number 4, I believe, here. And how I go through my processes, there's a lot of back and forth and verifying that you have the right names. It is all case sensitive, so you have to have the right form ID, you have to have the right fields within your form, and you're looping through, and then after you're done looping through, you're taking that document, you're putting it back into the form XML. So essentially we're replacing the column that was there with the form XML that we just constructed. So we took all the XML data, or all the data, out of the Excel file, we created XML data for it, and then we're pushing that back into SharePoint, into this column called form XML. So by hitting F5 on our keyboard, you can see that here's our output that says beginning, and it says, it's going to go through and loop through and find our items, and when it's done, it's going to update our form XML column, and you can see the output here: ID, Justin Barr, Mark, Beth, Lance. We have all of these just outputting to the screen, so you can see that we read the data correctly from Excel, which is what we showed. And then we can also just go take a look at our form. So this is form ID 4. We'll go back one here. We'll hover over form ID 4 and click Show Form. And you can see Form ID 4 here has our employee file that we uploaded with all of the data filled in that we just saw with PowerShell. So that use case or that test case that we tested to say, is PowerShell working? The answer is yes, it is working. We have the data there. So let's take it one step farther. Once you have your PowerShell script working, now you need to make sure it works within your workflow tool, that your data is loaded correctly. So we're going to go ahead and add one more employee to our employee file here. Since we have Mr. Dave Roa on the phone, our resident solution care expert, we'll go ahead and put him in here and hit save. And we'll close our file. And then we'll go ahead and browse out to that file. You can see that the form ID on the top right says form ID 6. We'll go ahead and grab our attachment. Now the thing to note about this is that we don't want the employees interacting with this form or workflow before Winshuttle has completed. So in order to make sure that they don't interact with it, in our Composer solution, there's a property on our plugin called synchronization. By default, it's true, which means it'll just go through this and then it'll execute in the background. In our case, we want it to be false because we don't want this task assigned to this person to review the data before the data has been loaded to the form. So that's a tricky setup there. The other unique thing about Winshuttle is that if you have a repeating table on your form, and not a lot of people know this, if you have a repeating table such as first name, ID, and last name, and you do not put any data into this form, Winshuttle will delete the rows because it's not needed. It's extra XML, and they don't want to store anything extra. However, in our case, because of the way we've constructed our PowerShell command, and we're calling a specific operation up here called clone node, where we're cloning what's in your repeating table and then constructing everything off that, we actually need that XML. So as a special setup, and what I put in the presentation, is you want to actually go through and configure Winshuttle to leave that repeating table there. So if I click on configuration options, there's a couple ways of interacting with this, and I demoed, or when we had our last WEBtips section, we actually reviewed the Winshuttle Workflow Central admin site. We talked about some of these configuration options, so I won't go into that, but I will type in repeating, because that's what our value begins with, and our special, or our command here says auto delete blank repeating form areas. So this says automatically go ahead and delete it. So what we've done is we've set this to false. By default, it's going to be true. We've come in here and said, okay, just set that to false. Now this is at a global level. You can see that the scope, when we hit save here, was scoped globally, but you can certainly select this just for your actual site. So I can go down to where my tips session is, and we're dealing specifically with a field. Our list that we're dealing with is for this form. You can go ahead and select your form and then say, oh, just for this form, don't auto delete it. So you can do that. And in our case, I just set it globally so that I can do this demo pretty quick. So I'll go ahead and cancel that. And the other thing I want to show you when we kick this form off, it's not here yet, we'll go ahead and kick the form off. We'll show you the manage background jobs. So, all right, so we've went ahead and uploaded our file. We have our configuration option set that it won't delete our repeating table elements. We've installed our OpenOffice XML SDK. We see that we're on form ID 6, so we're going to go ahead and hit save and run. A lot of setup and configuration, but if you follow these steps and follow these tips and tricks session, then you'll be able to do this every time, and it'll be really quick for you. So you can see right here, number 6 is in process, but if we sort by processing time, we can see that number 6 is not on my list, and that's because we set our synchronization to false. So it's going to wait to execute this before it tells us to review the data. Furthermore, if we go to our background jobs, manage background jobs inside of Winshuttle Workflow Central, we can actually see the job here, 213. We can see that this is waiting to call a command or a class called PowerShell Executor. And if we click on that, we can actually get more information around this. So in this case, we can see that the list name that we're using is read Excel file, which is the name of our Composer solution. And you can see the command that we're actually executing was provided through the arguments is the read Excel file. So this is really nice. You can look at it if there's any errors or anything like that. You can also restart this, and we've kind of shown that through if you click on any one of these items, you can actually restart a job that's aired out. So if you have any errors, all of these are complete, so we don't have errors. But you can see anything from PowerShell to sending email, so it's a really nice feature, and you can filter as well, and we demoed this last time when we did our web tips. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and kick off our job. It may already be running. We'll run it again one more time. And with this job, it's going to go ahead and kick off, and it's going to execute our PowerShell script. And with any luck, we'll actually have our data loaded up into our form for number 6. We're working on ID 6. We can go over here and refresh this, and we're looking at 213, and it looks like that is complete. So we see that 213 was completed, no errors. We'll go ahead and jump over to our SharePoint site, and we'll refresh our page here, and we should see a task on our list. So this is number 6, and for that task, we can see the task name is review data. We'll go ahead and open up number 6. And our PowerShell did not work. And why did it not work? Well, because Justin decided to modify it while we were in our demo, and it probably updated number 4. So let's go ahead and comment this out. We'll hit save, and let's see if we can go back through and do number 7. Go ahead and run this one more time. Yeah, when you are, what's nice is you can see that SharePoint's not refreshed. I just simply went and modified my PowerShell script because I forgot to comment out our testing data. And all we did is we simply hit save on our PowerShell script, and now we're going to execute it again. And this information will show up here. So it's a real time. When I said on our PowerPoint deck, it's the least intrusive. It really is. It's modifying a file and putting the file on the server, and you're ready to go. Okay, we'll go ahead and refresh this and see 7. And what's nice is we'll go look at our background jobs here. Still waiting on a PowerShell executor here. Let's look at this one. So we were looking at 213 before. See how we have this reset status to pending? We can actually re-execute that step as part of this job here. So this job is still running. We'll wait for it to complete, and I'll show you number 7, which number 7 will show on my task list, and with any luck, we'll have all of our data there. But then we'll go relook at number 6, and the same thing with number 6 is with resetting that background job. Yeah, we made a mistake. We forgot to do our execute our PowerShell, but you can certainly go back and mark it as pending. So you can see that 213 is now pending, and I'll go ahead and look at number 7. Number 7 should be on our list now. All right, number 7. So number 7, we have 1 through 6. We have our new employee Dave here as a row. So you can see how we took the data from Excel that was attached here. We put it into a repeating table. Other use cases that we're seeing clients is master data. You're pulling all the data, not making somebody bulk enter it. You pull it into your form. Once it's in your form, then you spin off a child form and a child request that goes through approval for each one of these options. So very, very unique, very cool that you don't have to mass enter. You can upload 100 records relatively quick. PowerShell is pretty simple to set up. As we've said, it's an OpenXML SDK. It's the PowerShell script, and it's updating your Winshuttle configuration options, and then you can import this. We'll go take a look at our friend number 6 here that we reset through the interface. And now we can see that number 6 actually has the data as well. So even though I messed up and I had to comment that out, I can still go to Winshuttle Workflow Central Admin and reset my process to execute that. Okay. So with all of that said, that's our PowerShell demonstration that shows you how to read Excel data from a PowerShell script and how to set up and configure it correctly. All right. Jump back over here. If you're unsure of how to create PowerShell or want many more examples, some of them won't be specific to Winshuttle, some of them will be the Active Directory. I've included a link down here for a gallery that TechNet has. You can see they're on our left side here. They're for your consumption, and there's a huge amount of repository for these scripts, and they come in everything from interacting with SharePoint to printing to servers to security. These are Active Directory. There's 1,366 scripts that were just around Active Directory. There's scripts for SharePoint as well and security. You can see here SharePoint. There's 627 scripts. So all of these scripts are provided by the community that you can download and use at your own risk or at your own testing, but you don't have to be a PowerShell expert. You can simply find something online. There's plenty of examples on these PowerShell scripts, and that's going to be included in the deck, so you can go use this deck and some of the scripts we've provided to further your form and workflow. So last but not least, I wanted to discuss the product roadmap for Winshuttle and Composer. They are releasing. We don't have a release date, but we know that it's going to be coming up soon for 11.0.2 for Composer and Workflow 10.9. There's a lot of exciting features that are in the Composer tool, one of which is the Excel import-export. So the demo we did today with the PowerShell script, you can actually out of the box be able to pull that Excel data into your form and put it into a repeating section. Now there's no manipulation. It's going to be a one-to-one, but a lot of people have been requesting some type of an Excel import. So this is one capability of doing it. If you have to have any type of manipulation or pulling from other systems, then you're going to want to use Excel for that. A lot of horizontal scrolling and visual GUI updates for Composer, and some updates to the rules and the validation, a couple new rules, and there's been some enhancements to both like the filtering and the signature element. So I've demoed a lot of time. Well, it's really nice to be able to sign your Composer solution if it's a time off request or if it's expense report. They've updated the signature element to require that somebody accept the signature that was put in and things like that. So I don't want to go through all of these specific enhancements and features because it would be another hour session on just some of the enhancements for your different things, such as being able to store your data off to an external place. But some of the features are definitely worth setting up and looking at. If there's past customers who've used the info path side of Winshuttle Designer, there was a cool feature where you could set refresh the value when the formula has been updated. And in Composer, we kind of lost that functionality. Now you can see on Composer on this left side here, it says refresh default value, and there's true or false. So now you have the capability that if one of your items change, say for your default value, that you can refresh it. Those were some things that when we moved from InfoPath and moved over to Composer that we lost, but Winshuttle's seeing the value of some of these features and they're building them back in. So they're continue to enhance the product. We'll go ahead and look at the, this is our signature element, and there was the accept rule. This rule will execute when the accept link is hit. So anytime somebody puts their signature and clicks that accept link, once that accept link hits, then we can actually execute a rule. You can set the required property to true to enable the accept link. So if it's the signature is required, what we saw is employees were signature was there, but they would never sign it and they would just send it through. So now you can set the signature to required, which makes the employee click the accept link to move on. So that'll guarantee that you're having a signature and there's a rule that goes off of that. All right, these are additional new features that are coming part of the Composer lineup. A lot of with rules and custom elements for formatting and showing and hiding of components group. There's even a DB2 data connection support now. Some of the clients are using that. So some of the general improvements you can scroll through. The thing I put this on here for is that you can see that there's continued updates to the product that they're improving. Whether it's a dialog box, there's a filter option for a dialog box that you want to be able to filter your solution on, to be able to allow sublabels of fields to wrap text to another column or something like that. Just the address element, which is a helper element, they've added a country code to it, so it makes it that helper element to be international based. So these are all good improvements. For Winshuttle Workflow 10.9, there was a lot of improvements around performance, around asynchronous web services. There's a brand new Winshuttle Workflow web part that I'm really excited to see and use, because we can see with some of the performance items that one of the things that a lot of people are struggling with is performance on their site. And one of the slowest performing web parts is that process list, because it has to loop through all of your data that's in Winshuttle. So Winshuttle saw that and said, well, how can we fix it? Well, they decided to write a brand new web part. And that web part has some very interesting features and functionalities to it. I put bug fixes and hotfix merges on this PowerPoint deck that you can review as well. So we'll go through, let's go ahead and look at some of the performance improvements. Some of these may jump out at you that, it takes time for task completion, it takes time to approve account. Some of the form load times was taking a while. So these are just all general performance improvements. And with the workflow web part that I indicated earlier, this is an example of what the web part's going to look like. So you don't see the different task list, the form library, and the process list all different. It's one web part that has a dashboard that has a tab for each one of your corresponding tasks, whether it's a form or a task or a process. So all three of those web parts were now combined into a new web part with new UI, and one of the biggest enhancements now is going to be around performance. So there's a completely new interface for this, and for viewing process history, you can see that this is the process history here. One reason for noting this is a lot of times people are upgrading to Winshuttle. I know when people went from 10.6 to 10.7, the interface changed on you and no one was ever alerted, hey, there's going to be a new interface. You just installed it and you were kind of surprised. So instead of saying surprise, we wanted to go ahead and put this out here that, hey, there is a new web part coming on. It's something you want to plan for. It's something you want to test within your organization. And the interface, I think, is streamlined and it has a lot more features and functionalities. You do lose some things, but overall, being able to speed up the SharePoint process, being able to submit a form faster, being able to review the history faster is a lot nicer in this new dashboard that they have for Winshuttle. If you ever did bulk approvals and you had to bulk approve things, it was very, very slow. Now with the bulk approval process, it's a lot streamlined. You can click it and then just hit approve, and it'll approve a lot of your processes. So I'll go through and you can see the web parts, see the task list. This is an example of a task list that we just saw earlier through the old interface. Same way of reassigning, things like that. So there's a lot in this deck, but I wanted to make sure that you were aware not only of the updates to the product, but then the bug fixes as well. You can see there's several slides, 2 slides on bug fixes, and these are all things that were fixed in 10.9. And in the hotfix merges, why I wanted to show you this is because you can see that they're continuing to merge and make updates. So, on 10.8 hotfix 5, Winshuttle's continue to update it, but they're rolling these hotfixes into 10.9. So 10.8 hotfix 4 was fully merged, and you can see that 10.8 GA hotfix 5 was partially merged, and these are the partials of what was merged into 10.9 FCS. And if you're not familiar with FCS versus GA, FCS is first customer ship, so this is going to be a first preview, whereas GA is general release. All right, last but not least, a lot of you are Solution Care customers, and you're seeing this presentation free, and you can continue to see added benefits from our Solution Care offering. You can see along the left some of the additional enhancements or additional services that we provide outside of your standard Winshuttle maintenance, and continue to grow within our WEBtips session and continue to open up tickets through our Solution Care portal for any one of these supported areas that you may want to have help with. Even if it's just help reviewing a PowerShell script that you've developed, we can certainly do that through our Solution Care offering. Lastly, we have our events that are coming up for Lean Utopia. We just had a great event after the CIO conference that we had some of our customers speak last Friday. This next event is coming up in Milwaukee. It's in September. I don't know the exact date, but it's coming up soon. Take a look at our new Clear Process Solutions website to keep up to date on all of our events, especially around Lean Utopia and some of our WEBtips sessions. So our next WEBtips session is going to be on our Winshuttle desktop products, and that's going to be July 16th. And as always, we do have process templates for purchase that you can use. Instead of spending the hours developing a solution, you can actually go ahead and use our pre-canned template that's based on Clear Process Solutions best practice. With that, I'll check our GoToMeeting and see if there's any questions. Go ahead and all right, if you have any questions, go ahead and ask them now. I do not see any questions. Okay. Well, with that said, we'll go ahead and stop our presentation, and we look forward to seeing everyone next time on our July WEBtips. Have a nice day.